Okay, California's AB 1127 targets striker-fired pistols with technical precision as dealers face escalating risks and political pressure. As we've talked about before, AB 1170, or excuse me, 1127, is trying to outlaw any gun that can easily be converted to full auto. And they actually talk about exactly how it can be easily converted. And there's a kind of a, not kind of, there's a do-it-yourself or, 3D printable device that you can attach to certain pistols that is like a switch and can basically turn them into a full auto, which is all that's illegal. Everything I just described is already illegal.
It's already against the law.
It's already against the law. And what they're describing is really, they're talking about Glocks. It can, most striker fire, but they're really talking about Glocks. That's the most popular thing.
And they're clones, right? Like Shadow System. There's other, Glock-like pistols that fit in the same category too.
Yes. And I found this in MSN. This guy named Charles Mitchell did a very interesting write-up, and I just wanted to talk about it. He did a very thorough explanation of exactly what we're talking about because it's so specific.
It is.
And so, what are we talking about when we talk about, this conversion for strike fire? Starts, quote, no novice should be able to convert their pistol into a DIY machine gun with just a 3D printer and screwdriver within minutes, said Everytown for Gun Safety senior firearms analyst Greg Lickenbrock in a recent statement. The rhetoric can come across as a call to arms, but it distills the technical essence of California Bill 1127, a bill whose convoluted definitions and swift political rise have had gun owners and sellers poring over every phrase for its actual effect. AB 1127's engineering-minded approach. This is where I thought it got really interesting because it's exactly what's going on. AB 1127's engineering-minded approach is subtle yet far-reaching. The bill adds a new category, the, quote, machine gun convertible pistol. We were talking earlier today about propaganda and how they use terms to scare people, and that's exactly what they're doing here. That's the new term, machine gun convertible pistol, as if that's what the pistol was designed to do, as if you're not doing something completely illegal and totally altering the function of the gun. This makes it sound like, hey, manufacturer, we're going to make a pistol that is machine convertible pistol. That's simply not true. It's any semi-automatic pistol with a cruciform trigger bar. Now, nobody knows what that is, but it's basically how a Glock works. It has this particular part. And if you replace it with this DIY piece, it can be converted to a full auto by the addition of a device familiarly referred to as a backplate. So the backplate on the slide that can actually turn your Glock into a full auto. It's called a Glock switch. And, it doesn't take a whole lot. It's not a big technological feat to switch out your backplate. I'm as incompetent as it gets when it comes to do-it-yourself gunsmithing. I can even do that. But what I can't do is print out a Glock switch, and nor would I because it's illegal, and I am a law-abiding, sane-trained gun owner. So this technical specificity is no coincidence. The cruciform trigger bar is the defining feature of striker-fired pistols, most predominantly Glock models and their numerous clones. So basically, he goes on to talk about how with this engineering-minded restriction, they're basically taking a piece of this gun and saying, hey, if you completely and totally re-engineer this in your garage illegally, then it could possibly turn into a full auto firearm. So therefore, we're not going to ban guns because that's illegal and that sounds scary and that makes us look like extremists. Instead, what we're going to do is we're just going to ban this evil piece that makes it into a scary, evil, gun that only criminals use. And because we're doing that, it's going to apply to every striker fire pistol, aka the most popular firearms being sold in America today. So the effect is still a gun ban. But when you explain it like, hey, there's this gun, Miss, Mr. and Mrs. American, there's this gun that they make that can be easily converted into a machine gun. So that's all we're doing. We're not banning guns here. We're just banning this little piece and whatever and blah blah blah.
And any guns that can take that little piece.
And any guns that can take that little piece. And to add insult to injury, Glock has actually said, hey, you know what? In our new generation, in our new gun, we're actually going to fix that so that they can't do that. And in this bill, they said it's not good enough. Mm-hmm. So they even tried to comply, or took the initiative to to fix this issue that criminals were abusing, and the state of California said, forget it, it's not good enough. So what do you guys think of that?
I'm not surprised.
I think there's a lot of kind of propaganda out there about this. We were talking about that earlier, the concept that, people are just saying whatever they want to say, and every town is putting out a lot of content about why this is important and why it's going to save lives. And I understand that people who maybe don't know a lot about guns or the way guns work would be, kind of deceived by the propaganda out there. I think it's not a stretch to think to yourself, well, if somebody could do this in their garage, it does turn it into a relatively, potentially safe device, all the way up to something that can just go crazy. But I've seen things that say oh, it could shoot 1,200 rounds a minute, or these numbers that sound horrifying.
Right.
But how would you possibly get 1,200 rounds into your gun in a minute?
Right.
So let's say even if you have high capacity, standard capacity magazines, right, that hold 15 or 17 for a Glock. Or you have the really big ones. You've got a stendo, which you can't have, but let's say you do. So you've got a lot of rounds in one magazine. You still have to continually reload that gun, because as soon as the magazine is, it's not belt fed.
Right.
You don't have 1,200 rounds in a drum on a Glock, right? You have to put in magazines. So the 1,200 rounds per minute is the technical engineering. Sure, the slide cycle's in 0.05 seconds, and if you continually let 1,200 rounds go through the gun without any reloads or anything, it's technically possible. Not even sure if a Glock would hold up for 1,200 rounds in 1 minute without malfunctions or anything, but it's just funny. All of the language around it is so specific, 1,200 rounds a minute. And this is, I've seen, I think it was on Twitter, every town had something that was talking about how often they're used in mass shootings.
Yeah.
And it's not often at all. I think
Right.
there's been 2 or something, you actually look into it and you're okay, the 1,200 rounds per minute is technically true, but very deceiving. The mass shootings or notorious shootings that have occurred are actually very minimal. And then there was a stat that was saying between certain years, that police have uncovered or have recovered a lot of these, converted pistols at crime scenes and things like that. But they are leaving out the parts that are important here, which is that these are not being converted by regular law-abiding non-felons. These are being converted by people who already aren't allowed to own a gun. I think from everything that I've seen as far as the numbers and stuff, most of the conversions have been happening in gang-related shootings. So if we're thinking about, okay, let's look at the people who are doing those shootings, they already can't even own a gun.
Right.
So it's the list of crimes that they're committing to even do this is so long. And for Sacramento to think oh, this is going to impact that, it's going to have a positive, side effect of less of these out there. Well, the people who are doing this are already felons. And unless you're going to put the felons in prison, they're going to continue to do these types of things. And I think that we're very aware of how wrong some of this is if you know a lot about guns, if you're familiar with it. But to the layperson, I totally understand how this sounds like a life-saving measure. People hear, machine gun, and they think, oh yeah, we shouldn't allow those around. Well, we don't allow them. This is literally banning regular semi-automatic Glocks, which is a very, very popular handgun.
Yeah, 50% of guns out there being sold right now are probably would get banned if this thing passes in its current form.
Yes.
Yeah.
or more. It might even be more.
It might be more,
People need to understand just how popular striker fire is. You know, it used to be that you would identify a problem and come up with a piece of public policy to solve that problem. And now they have a result in mind, and that is to basically eliminate gun ownership and carrying guns, you know, and so they're coming up with public policy to that end. So,
and they're kind of making up the problem. It's a problem that doesn't really exist.
Right, yeah. So AB 1127, and since its filing, the bill has passed the Assembly Public Safety 7-1, the Judiciary Committee 9-2, and Appropriations 11-2. Those are all the three big committees, and it's pretty much happened through partisan voting. All the Democrats voted for it. Most of the Republicans voted against it. So that's what's going on. So keep that in mind. Just wanted to explain that. Like I said, I thought that his angle and his explanation about the engineering piece was extremely important. Okay, next, SB2. We're all extremely familiar with SB2. The biggest part about SB2 is, of course, the expansion of prohibited places where you can't carry even if you have a CCW. And when I say expansion, that's an understatement. I mean, they basically said every place outside of your home you no longer can carry if you have a CCW. You know, so you go through the process of getting a CCW, you get the additional background check, the additional training, the additional fee. You know, you go through all these steps, and then they say, well, that's still not enough. You still can't carry basically anywhere. But this isn't just, and then there's a lot of other little pieces to this. We're finding out that there are a lot of other pieces to SB2. That's just the most immediate and obvious. There's a lot of little landmines in it. But this isn't just another gun law. This isn't simply another restriction. This is a much bigger thing. This is something that is historically awful. You know, this is something that we're not just splitting hairs here anymore, and it's something that we've talked about in the past. And I'm going to talk more of this. This truly is a civil rights issue. Now, something occurred to me. I was being a nerd over the last couple of days, and I was watching Star Wars, the original Star Wars from the 70s. You know, episode 4, and it was pretty interesting. Something in there jumped out at me and made me think of SB2, and I want to show you what it is. Watch this scene. Everybody remembers this scene.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
Your droids, they'll have to wait outside. We don't want them here.
Let's wait out by the speeder. We don't want any trouble.
I heartily agree with you, sir.
So everybody remembers the bar scene, right? You remember that, you know, Luke went in there and they kicked old C-3PO out. What I don't think a lot of people remember is this was the late 70s. This was barely a decade after the Civil Rights Act when this type of thing actually happened to people. And, you know, barely a decade. I think it was 12 years since it was legal to say, hey, you're black, you can't come in. You can't come into my restaurant. You can't come into my bar. You can't come into my establishment because of the color of your skin. You can't use the same bathrooms. You can't use the same water fountains. You can't eat at the same counters. And this was Star Wars. This was George Lucas's way of basically, talking about that. You know, basically saying, hey, this is a reality. This was a social statement at the time. You know, this wasn't playing into the story. This was him saying, look at how horrible this was. And oh, by the way, it was just 10, 12 years ago. This was yesterday, to them. And we don't really think about that. That stuff has been lost to history. It's gotten to the point where that type of behavior is so extreme and so offensive that it doesn't even seem realistic anymore, when the reality was there was an entire section of our country where it was just okay to do that. And of course, civil rights, the term civil rights, although actually a very broad term, has been assigned to just that type of civil right, which I get it. It was so appalling and so horrible, and there was such a fight. But really, this is another extension of that. Now, flash forward to 2025. What does SB2 do? Well, my civil right to keep and bear arms, what if I walk into a bar? Hey, get out of here. We don't like your kind. And I think that people are hesitant to make that comparison because of the benefit of hindsight. You know, you have the benefit of hindsight. So you've looked back and said, wow, that what they did in, you know, the South was horrible. And it wasn't just the South. There were a lot of other states that did it. But that type of discrimination was horrible, you know, and then you're hesitant. You're almost apologetic about being a gun owner. Like, well, I don't know if it's quite the same. And gee, they went through a lot. It's very much the same. The comparison is very much the same. In fact, it's almost identical at this point, you know, whereas if you were black in Alabama in 1960 and you walked into a bar that you weren't allowed to be at, would you get arrested? Hell yeah, you'd get arrested. In 2026, if this thing passes and you're exercising your civil right to protect and defend yourself and you walk into a bar where they don't want you, could you get arrested? So I think it's important, extremely important, that we learn from history and that we stop apologizing for being gun owners. We're the good guys. We're the guys that are doing right. And this truly is a civil rights issue. You know, the sensitive areas, you know, expanding those and saying, hey, you're unwanted, your kind is unwanted here. They're now codifying that, putting that into California law, you know, so many years later. But it's the same exact thing. So although it's kind of funny that it's Star Wars and I'm watching a nerdy sci-fi movie, but that was a very real social commentary in that movie from an incident, you know, not just an incident, but an entire way of life for decades that had just recently ended. I remember in 1981, I was 5 years old and I moved to Panama City Beach, Florida, which is basically lower Alabama, they used to call it. They called it the Redneck Riviera.
Flabama?
Yeah. And there, I remember there were restaurants and bars. I remember seeing black and white pictures up on the wall of one of the main streets in Panama City, Harrison Avenue. That was like one of their main streets in downtown Panama City where they had KKK parades. In 1981, that stuff had just happened. It had just happened. So anyway, I wanted to show that to you. I wanted to talk a little bit about it, see what you guys thought. But the important piece I want you to walk away with is this is a civil rights battle. And they are doing the exact same thing to you as a gun owner as they've done in so many other civil rights issues, not just the most well-known, which, of course, was the civil rights battle for African Americans in the South and other parts of the country. But in every civil rights issue, it's the same thing. We have to fight it the exact same way, unapologetically, you know, and as if it is what it is, which is a civil rights issue. So what are your thoughts? Is it uncomfortable for you to equate what we're fighting for, the Second Amendment, with you know, the civil rights issue in the 60s with blacks in the South? Is that an uncomfortable comparison?
I don't know if it's uncomfortable. I think I just one immediate difference, and I don't know if this is, I don't know how this would play a role, is the color of skin is not a choice. It's something you're born with. Carrying of a firearm is a choice. It's also a right, but it's a right. We have so there's a little bit of a difference there. But as far as it being a right for them to be there and a right for us to be there, absolutely a parallel, right?
Carrying guns is absolutely a choice, but self-defense,
right?
Not really a choice, you know?
Right.
Preserving your own life.
And
Right.
I think the parallel is there too, because we know so much of gun control and anti-gun legislation came from an intention to basically commit civil rights violations against African American population. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good parallel. I think we as a you know, community of people who love guns and want self-defense just need to do a better job of talking about self-defense and what it actually is. You know, I think it's easy for us to get into like, oh, we love guns and guns are fun to shoot and all of that. But like at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is self-defense and the right to defend our life against somebody else making the choice for us.
Yep. Amen.
And I think far too many of our youth, especially in California, are being taught the propaganda, they're seeing it. Their parents were likely exposed to it at some point. I think it's a generational thing too, quite a bit. I know I'm doing my part. My kids are educated. They're informed. They are great shooters, and I think that, I mean, of course, it's a long game, but I think that can be a really big point too, to where we can start making a difference. Is start educating our youth. Don't make that firearm something that you tuck away, like in a hidden quadrant of a castle in a Disney movie. Like, they're going to want to find that hidden thing. Teach them respect, teach them safety. And that, I mean, I know that's long game, but for right now, what can we do? Got to fight.
There you go.
That's it.
Okay, so I again wanted to bring that up. Want to make sure that people, start thinking about having that exact state of mind. That hey, this isn't just a, hey, I want cool toys,
No.
and neat tools. This is a civil rights thing. So the next one is the CCRKBA weighs in on training mandates in Massachusetts. What the heck is the CCR? What is it? CCRKBA. That is the Citizens Committee for the Rights to Keep and Bear Arms. It's out of Massachusetts, and this article comes from folks that we talked to last week, the News 2A folks, and John Petrolino, who is an awesome friend of the show. Responding to the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court, Massachusetts added live fire requirements to get a license to carry. The Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms answered Massachusetts' call for comments. The Bay State was one of the many jurisdictions that responded negatively towards the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin decision. Part of their sweeping law change was the addition of live fire training in order to get a license to carry in the Commonwealth. Recently, the Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security requested commentary for the public concerning the addition to the regulations. CCRKBA announced they've contacted the office admonishing the requirement and delivered their recommendations. I think it's kind of amazing. I think that I have my Utah CCW. That's the only out-of-state. Do you have an out-of-state CCW?
Yeah, I have Utah.
You have Utah? What do you have?
Arizona and Utah.
So I don't think I didn't have to.
There's not a live fire requirement.
There's not a live fire requirement, right?
No.
But still, in California, I think it's so ingrained that there's a live fire requirement. Like now, there's a 2-day requirement for initials. That I've become so conditioned that I read this, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, what? And then I forgot. Well, yeah, we're one of the few states that really even has that, and they're fighting back and saying, no, we're drawing a line in the sand. And I think it's a difficult. It's a difficult argument. I think that a lot of people that aren't knowledgeable are very comfortable with the idea of making somebody do a live fire test without 100%. Considering the costs and how it actually limits people.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all understand the concept behind it, right? Like, somebody who thinks that live fire tests make sense are probably thinking, okay, well, now we know that person understands how to use their gun, all of that. But what we're missing is that a lot of the people who need a gun or want a gun the most are in a time crunch. They are getting their CCW or they're buying their first gun because they're afraid of something specific happening in their life right now or something that could happen in their life soon. And so to require them to wait a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year to get that right is the part that is so unconstitutional. I'm completely against any, mandated training requirements. I don't think there should be any live fire. I don't think there should even be a class requirement or a test requirement. I think if you want to carry a gun to defend yourself, you should have the right to do that. But I will say if we are going to live in a state that requires some sort of a standard, then that standard should make some sense. And I think a 16-hour standard like what we have here does not make sense for most folks. Like you think about normal people, single moms, working parents, it's tough to get away for 16 hours. So that coupled with the huge financial impact that has, a lot of these classes cost as much as it costs to purchase the gun. And then you've got the license and all the all the, background check and all that stuff. It adds up. I think it could cost you like $700 to get your CCW and San Diego, depending who you take your class with, and all of the fees for the license with the county. So there's a lot of other problems aside from just, we could all sit here and say, well, this is unconstitutional, but there's other problems here too, besides just the fact that it's a direct infringement on our rights.
Well, John wrote in his commentary, in his letter actually to them, he writes that, well, the debate at hand is not whether or not compulsory training is constitutional, but rather the type of training that would satisfy a statutory requirement. It's important to preface our recommendation with our stance on this issue, which is right along the lines of exactly what you're saying there. On behalf of our members, we want to make it clear that we are not in favor of training mandates in order to exercise a constitutional right. Requiring training, live fire or otherwise, in order to purchase, own, or carry a firearm is akin to needing a college degree in order to express one's own opinion or practice their religion. There are no training requirements in order to exercise any other civil liberties enumerated by the U.S. Bill of Rights. And the Second Amendment should not be treated like a second-class right. Now,
I love that analogy.
Isn't that great?
That's a good one. Yeah.
And this actually, I think it's great that these guys are coming out so strong on this, and I actually have some really good news. Do you remember a few weeks ago we were talking about how there was a bill in Sacramento that was going to require an 8-hour class before you could even purchase?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's dead. That's dead.
That's good news.
I know, right?
Can we get a little cheering?
Yeah, now that you found the cheering button. All right, let's talk about Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson has been around since guns have been around. I mean, they're forever. Smith & Wesson is such a iconic company. And there's a case that the Supreme Court just threw out on its ear. It's the Smith & Wesson versus USA. So in Smith & Wesson, Inc. versus Mexico, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Mexico's lawsuit against U.S. gun manufacturers. So Mexico is basically saying, hey, we're going to sue gun manufacturers because of the gun violence that we can't stop in Mexico. The case centered around the question on whether gun manufacturers could be held liable for the harm caused by their firearms used in Mexico by drug cartels. The court determined that Mexico's lawsuit failed to meet and this is an important phrase, the aiding and abetting requirement, which would have removed it's referred to as the PLCAA, and that stands for the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. So as long as there was no aiding and abetting, then they were protected by the PLCAA, and that's specifically for gun manufacturers. So Mexico's lawsuit, what they were really trying to do is hold U.S. gun manufacturers liable for all the harm caused by firearms in their country, and specifically drug cartels. That's who's doing this. It's not sane, trained, law-abiding gun owners, although it's very hard to be a law-abiding gun owner in Mexico. It's still possible. These are drug cartels that are doing this. And they argued that manufacturers were aiding and abetting gun traffickers across the border. Well, the PLCAA is a federal law that generally shields gun manufacturers from liability in cases where guns are being used in illegal activities. The aiding and abetting part is particularly important. The PLCAA contains an exception for cases where a gun manufacturer aids and abets another person in committing a firearms offense. Mexico argued that the gun manufacturer's actions constituted aiding and abetting illegal sales to traffickers. Of course, that is untrue. They were in no way aiding, certainly were not abetting. They were just doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is selling the most effective self-defense tool, protected by the Second Amendment. Well, the Supreme Court saw right through that. The Supreme Court ruled that Mexico's allegations were insufficient to demonstrate the aiding and abetting, finding that manufacturers' actions did not meet the required standard. So what are the consequences? Well, the ruling effectively shields all U.S. gun manufacturers. They're really already shielded by the PLCAA. But this further shields the U.S. gun manufacturers from lawsuits like this filed by Mexico or really anybody, and limited the ability of foreign governments of all kinds to hold liable the misuse of firearms from their own people. Enormously important decision. I think that this was making everybody nervous. How was this going to go? And the fact that the Supreme Court just threw this out on its ear and did it so quickly is extremely good news. So
yes.
Congratulations, Smith & Wesson. What do you guys think?
I'm very thankful. I'm very glad.
Yeah.
Again, we've seen there's already a law protecting. There's already a law regarding this, and I'm honestly a little surprised and thankful that it was upheld and that it went our way.
There you go.
It's like trying to, like the whole thing goes. It's like trying to blame the spoon maker for people being fat. It doesn't work. You have a choice.
Exactly.
Blame the person, not the tool.
Exactly.
That's it.
So that was good news. And then, of course, like I said, the bill that was going to require people to, in California, to go through live fire training, an 8-hour class to purchase a gun, whether it was your first gun or your 100th gun, you still had to go through this training. That's as good as dead. Doesn't mean it won't come back. It may still come back. But for now, it's as good as dead. So that's a pretty good week.
Yeah, it's a great week, actually.
Right? We're
lot
almost
of good
getting
news.
spoiled. You
I know.
Like if this had happened 10 years ago, there would have been a parade. But now we're just like, oh, cool, more good news.
Another good thing, yeah.
So anyway, that's our legal and legislative segment.
All right.
Hey, thanks for watching Gun Owners Radio. I hope you loved that clip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media. And check out our website at gunownersradio.com.